So, lucky me, I get to be the first presenter on an absolutely outrageous topic called the electrification of everything. I did not think that just because I'm from Norway, where we want to literally electrify everything, we have started by electrifying our oil platforms, that I would be invited to the port of Fujairah to actually speak about electrification when I, of course, think of oil and gas here, primarily. So I'm going to discuss the scenario and what is the opportunity ahead in the MENA region, how we could potentially electrify as much as possible, and what failure to electrify in this region will mean in terms of loss of revenue and additional costs. So to start, how could we consider electrifying at a massive pace? What would that actually mean? If I could, let's flip to the next slide, please. Thank you. So here we are looking at how much electricity demand has grown in the last 22 years. And it's grown by 300%. And here we have a map that is showing really that difference across the region. Of course, in conflict, we have decreases, but we can really see that it has exploded. In the next decade, at a minimum, electricity demand here will increase by 50%. How are we going to electrify? Well, there's a three-pronged solution. Number one, we need to invest in renewables and low-carbon power generation. What does that mean? Solar, wind, hydro, nuclear power, gas, and carbon capture and storage, right? Number one. Number two, we need to have energy transmission infrastructure. There's going to be a session tomorrow on microgrids on how we can do that on a local level to keep things more stable rather than on an international level like we've done in Europe, which has some benefits in that you can share energy across regions, but it makes the grid and the system much less stable. And that's why we had power outages like this summer in Spain and Portugal. In this infrastructure investment, we need to invest in power lines, we need to invest in transformer substations. We need to invest in technologies for electric vehicles, charging, and again, those grid constraints are massive. When we think about China, which is the front runner in renewable power generation, in general electrification, those grids are only 15 to 20 years old. If you compare that with Europe, Europe's grids are 45 to 50 years old. So we need massive investment. Fortunately, the Middle East and North Africa is only around 5 to 10 years behind in terms of the quality of the grids behind China. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Finally, the third part is electricity storage. And this has historically been pumped hydro, but increasingly batteries are the absolute future here. And that means we need to have efficiency in our types of batteries. We need to have scalability in building those batteries and in having them store for longer periods of time. And we need to have the resources available to build those batteries. So, as I mentioned, we're going to have this increase in demand in electrification in this region of the world, MENA, by 50%. That's 800 terawatt hours. That's the total demand of Germany and Spain. I picked those two countries because they are at the forefront in Europe in terms of wind and solar power generation. What is the demand driver in the MENA region? It's actually cooling and desalination. That's going to constitute 40% of demand in this region. This region is the third largest growing demand center in the world. Number one for electricity. Number one is China. Number two is India. Number three is here. So we are at the center of this explosion in demand. But what is our baseline? Last year, electricity generation in this region was 70% provided by natural gas, 20% by oil, 5% by coal, and 5% by renewables. The cost in terms of generating and building out the infrastructure to generate that electricity was $44 billion last year. Now, to prepare for this next decade of demand, we have to invest in this region a minimum of $66 billion every single year in renewables, in nuclear power, and in the grid. And those grid investments are 40% of that spend. As I mentioned at the beginning, what is the cost of failure? And this is the number we need to concentrate on. If we do not reach this capacity on the renewables, nuclear, storage side and grid, this region will lose $80 billion a year in oil and gas revenue, because oil and gas will be unavailable to export out of the region to other demand centers, because we will need to rely on oil and gas for our electricity demand here. In addition, we will have import bills of around $20 billion a year, and then you can add in the costs of carbon and so forth on a global level. So that's minimum $100 billion a year in losses if we do not utilize the $66 billion a year we need to spend on building out this infrastructure. This failure, how will that makeup be done? On the oil side, it will be primarily consumed in Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. The gas side, Egypt, here in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And we will, of course, then need to invest in additional diesel generators and gas power plants. So it'll not be not for naught just the 100 billion versus the 66 billion. It will actually involve increases in that infrastructure spending. So, moving on to the backup generators besides oil and gas that I just mentioned, if we think about batteries, right? So I come from an oil trading company, Svelland Capital, and we are always interested in the rise of commodity prices and the collapse. So we can go both long and short. And typically, everyone always thinks of batteries. We're going to run out of capacity to build the batteries because we won't have enough cobalt, we won't have enough nickel, we won't have enough lithium. And from Svelland Capital's perspective, we've already hit those boom and bust cycles on that part. The critical parts that are coming as we develop new batteries are the shortage of copper, graphite, and phosphate. And if we could go to the next slide, please. I just want to show the map of where we currently produce major minerals, right? And here you can see lithium, cobalt, what has been the historic center of supply. And I also want to point out where we are located right now, that we do not have these resources here. But of course, here in the Middle East, we're located literally in the middle. And we can be that supply chain between the resources in Africa and the final demand center in China, where we build the batteries. And of course, we could assemble them here the way Europe has successfully done, rather than building them from scratch. Now, if we start with copper in particular, because copper has had a very exciting year in terms of exploding in prices, 10% in a day, dropping 24% 2.5 weeks later. What is the necessary need for copper when we think about the next decade? Well, We need about 1.5 times the current production level in the world, and it's absolutely impossible to reach it because the average mine takes 18 months from the start, 18 years from the start of final investment FID until we actually have normalized production. We also had earlier in September, the world's second largest copper mine in the world has shut down, right? But what does the demand come from? Well, 27% of copper demand comes from electric vehicles. 25% comes from renewables generation. 16% is for the grid. 7% is for charging infrastructure. 23% is economic growth. So yes, that means housing in China. And data centers and AI are only 6%. Thus far, we've only figured out how to substitute away 11% of that, largely through aluminium. So it's impossible for us to actually achieve what we need in copper. The other two big ones are graphite and phosphate. If we go to the next slide, please, I just want to point out that the huge opportunity in phosphate, and these are the new BYD batteries. Next slide, please. Is they will be switching away from cobalt and nickel and into phosphate. And here you see Morocco is the world's largest phosphate center. This is absolutely the future in terms of long-term battery storage solutions. And we are located very nearby. All of this, I want to wrap it up in a political context, right? Because phosphate, of course, is also used as a fertilizer. And this goes back to my point about Norway electrifying everything. The cost of electricity have skyrocketed in Norway. The cost of food, if we dedicate all the phosphate in the world towards electrification and batteries, the cost of food will skyrocket and we will have a shortage of food. So there are always trade-offs. What is very important for this region is to continue building that relationship with China and with Asia, use the vacuum that the US has created in terms of investment, and have this region invest more in these production regions, especially in Africa, and just be that middle route for the future. But we cannot neglect oil and gas investment at the same time, because then the systems will collapse either here or abroad. And that's why we cannot electrify everything. Thank you very much.